So today is about a pork loin that I'm going to smoke up out on the grill. But it's also about the glaze we're going to be making, because we're going to season up this pork loin, get it out on the SnS Grills Kettle, smoke it up with some hickory, and sauce it up with a honey glaze that's going to turn this fantastic piece of pork into an amazing piece of pork. So you're asking yourself right now, what is honey glaze? Good guess is there's going to be honey in it, but there's going to be more than one honey component. So let's get into it. We're starting with 3/4 of a cup of honey. To this, I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of a Jack Daniel's Tennessee honey whiskey liqueur, whatever you want to call it. It's a blend of like honey and whiskey. It's really good. It's going to go great with this, and this is our honey here. That's going to take a little bit to mix together because we have 2 very different ingredients here, one super liquidy and one very viscous. We're not adding a third honey, we're actually adding a maple component because I want a little bit of contrast between that honey and something else, but I still want it to be a nice sweet glaze. Now you could use 2 tablespoons of maple syrup here, but what I'm using is 2 teaspoons of a maple syrup powder that I got from Old Town Spice Shop. I love experimenting with these things, and this stuff is really good. And I'm just going to start mixing this all together slowly. It's going to take some time. I'm going to switch to the whisk in just a minute here. Another way to sort of speed this process up to mix these is put it in a double boiler. Once that honey is warmed up, it really sort of accepts the looser liquids better. Let's switch to my whisk, but first I'm going to take a taste here. Let's see. That's what I'm looking for. Now I'm going to use my massively too large whisk here. Coming together. So this is what I'm looking for here. You have one homogeneous glaze, not like a layer on the top of that whiskey and the honey below. All right, I'm going to cover this up. Let's get our pork loin out here. So here is our pork loin. This is a 5-pound pork loin. You can see that it has a nice little fat cap on it. I'm not going to take anything off. This is just enough for me. Sometimes I will trim off all this fat so you have just a meat surface. But sometimes I also want that almost a pork chop experience because there's some nice fat on the exterior of pork chops if you ever had that. And I like that sometimes, so that's what we're doing today. We're going to get a good rub on this, and what I'm using today is Uncle Steve's Shake Gator Shake. It has a really unique flavor to it, and I think it's going to be a nice underlayer to that sweet glaze we're going to put on at the end. I also just love the color of this rub. No binder necessary here. Got a lot of surface moisture. Get this end here. For all the people that say, you never use commercial rubs, you always make your own rubs. Here, I'm using a rub you can buy. I'm going to be going fat side down today. There we go. Let's go fire up the SnS Grills Kettle. So I'm just about at the target temp for the SnS Grills Kettle that I'm shooting for today. That's around 250 degrees. So let's go ahead and get this pork loin on. Going fat side down. My temperature probe in here. Get a piece of hickory wood on here. And I don't have the slow insert filled up full today. I don't need 7 hours of cook time out of it. Just gonna let that piece of wood catch real quick before you put the lid on. All right, our piece of hickory is caught. Let's get our lid on and get smoking. I've had people ask, why do you let the chunk of wood catch fire before you put the lid on, since it's just gonna go out and smolder anyway? That's the application in the kettle. I wanna know it's a good piece of wood and that it would catch fire. The ultimate internal temperature of this pork loin that we're shooting for is 145. That's a safe temperature for whole pieces of pork, and it's a really good temperature, a lot of juiciness left. But somewhere around 110, we're gonna glaze this. As I mentioned, my target temp for the kettle today is about 250, so I'll adjust the vents to keep us in that range. And I'll see you back here when we get close to that 110 and it's time to glaze. All right, we've been going for just over an hour. Our pork loin is hitting 110 internal. Let's go ahead and glaze this up. I want to dab it as much as I can here so I don't brush off the rub. This is smelling great. And I just realized I didn't put anything to catch the drip, so I'm gonna have a messy kettle. All right, let's get our lid on and let this finish to 145. All right, we've been going for just about 2.5 hours, and we're about to hit 145 internal, so let's check our pork loin. Got it half in the sun, half out of the sun, but man, that looks good. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get this pork loin off of here. We're gonna get it inside, let it rest for about 15 minutes, loosely tended with foil, and then we will cut in and have a taste. So here is our pork loin. It's been resting for 15 minutes and it just looks beautiful. And I'm kind of thinking this may be the best looking pork loin I've made. Taste is another matter. We haven't tasted it yet, but outside this color is gorgeous. Part of that's from that Uncle Steve's shake, gator shake, that nice sort of reddish color to it, and also the honey glaze. But what we really got to find out is what's inside, how it tastes. So let's slice in. I'm just going to go straight in the middle here. Let's see. Yeah, I'd say that's juicy. Very, very tiny smoke ring. Generally on pork loins, I don't see a lot of smoke ring. It's not on there a long enough time, but just a tiny little one right around the edge. Now let's cut some slices. Let's see here. Get some thin ones. Oh yeah. Ooh, those look good. Oh, this is exactly what I'm hoping for when I make pork loin, a nice juicy interior. I'm gonna cut some pieces of this up because it's time to taste. Complete and total juice-a-lanch here. I'm gonna go with this piece right here to start. So let's see. Perfect flavor matching there with that Uncle Steve shake, gator shake, which has got almost a tanginess to it, and the sweetness of that glaze, just perfect. Super tender, juicy inside as you can see. As I mentioned, this was about 2.5 hours, and that lower temperature range I used, that 250, even though it was closer to 260 most of the time, I find that really does help maintain the moisture and the juiciness rather than going at a higher temperature with pork loin. You definitely can cook it higher, 275, 300, 325, but I've had much better luck cooking it at those lower temperatures and retaining that moisture. And this is proof of that. I didn't do a final sear on this because I really didn't feel it needed it. It had such a nice color on the outside, just a really pretty look to it. Didn't want to disturb that. But if you want to sear your pork loin at the end, go ahead and do that. But I would do it right around 135, 140, so you don't take that temperature too far beyond 145. But for me today, no sear necessary. So that is my pork loin on the SnS Grills Kettle with the honey glaze and the gator shake underneath that for a base of flavor. I'd put this right up there with my favorite pork loins that I've made. Juicy, tender, great flavor inside and out. This is a fantastic meal with just a little bit of effort put into it.